Just when everyone thought the Diddy story couldn't get any more chaotic, a completely new twist hit the internet, and this time, it didn't come from former employees, industry insiders, or courtroom leaks. It came from the one place nobody saw coming, Diddy's own children. For months, the headlines have been filled with allegations, lawsuits, estate battles, federal whispers, and a documentary that shook the entire entertainment world. But suddenly, the narrative shifted. The spotlight moved from scandals and corporate war to the emotional voices of the people who have lived closest to Diddy his entire life, his 7 children. And when 6 of them walked into that courtroom during Diddy's sentencing, the room changed. These weren't lawyers, victims, or critics. These were the kids who grew up around the power, the pressure, and the version of their father the world never truly saw. Their voices didn't defend the crimes he was convicted of, but they revealed a side of the story no one expected to hear. One by one, they stood before the judge, calling him a changed man. Quincy said they'd watched their father evolve in ways they hadn't seen in over a decade. Christian called Diddy his hero. Jesse admitted he wasn't perfect but insisted they still needed him in their lives. And Justin, the son who's been pulled into multiple headlines on his own, called his father his superhero and begged for a second chance. Even more heartbreaking was the mention of their youngest sister, Love, just 2 years old, asking every night where her father is. A detail that stunned the courtroom and the internet at the same time. After months of public silence, this was the first real glimpse into how Diddy's downfall has torn through his own family. And whether people believe their words or not, the emotional weight of those statements shifted the entire conversation. Because their message wasn't about fame, rumors, or documentaries, it was about a family trying to hold itself together while the world watches their father unravel. But the emotion didn't stop there. Diddy himself apologized to his children, admitting he failed as a father, telling them they deserved better, a moment that surprised even people who had already written him off completely. And as powerful as these moments were, they raised an even bigger question: how did the situation spiral so far that his own children had to stand in court and plead for mercy? To understand that, we have to go back, through the lawsuits, the estate battles, the accusations, the Netflix documentary, and the insiders who keep coming forward with stories that won't stay buried. Because this emotional twist didn't appear out of nowhere. It's the result of everything that's been building for years. And once you see the full picture, the emotional pleas from his kids start to make a lot more sense, and the entire saga becomes even darker than before. When the courtroom doors opened on October 3rd, no one expected the moment that followed. 6 of Diddy's 7 children walked in together: Quincy, Justin, Christian, Chance, and the twins, Jesse and Lila, standing shoulder to shoulder as the world waited to hear what they had to say. These weren't celebrity kids trying to protect a brand. These were children trying to protect their father, even as he faced some of the darkest accusations of his life. Their voices cracked. Their hands shook. But one by one, they stepped up to the podium and spoke directly to the judge, not as public figures, but as kids begging for their father's future. Quincy went first, and his words set the tone for everything that came after. He didn't pretend his dad was perfect. He didn't try to erase the past. Instead, he painted a picture of a man he believed had changed. Week after week, he said, "We've seen him evolve, something we haven't seen in 15 years. To Quincy, the man standing in front of the court wasn't the same person facing those accusations. He believed his dad had transformed, and he wanted everyone in that room to see it. Christian followed, and this was the moment that grabbed headlines everywhere. He looked straight at the judge and said his father was the greatest in the world. He called him his hero, the person who taught him how to move through life, how to treat people, how to treat women with respect. For Christian, the man being sentenced wasn't a monster. He was the dad who raised him, the figure he'd looked up to since childhood." Then came Jessie, who delivered one of the hardest truths of all. She openly admitted her father isn't perfect, and that the family wasn't there to excuse anything. But her voice broke as she added, "He's still our dad, and we still need him present in our lives." It was a moment that pulled the courtroom out of the headlines and into the reality of what this meant for a family, a broken home trying to hold itself together. Delilah spoke next, begging for a chance to heal together, to move forward not as a scandal but as people trying to rebuild. She reminded everyone that behind every headline was a family trying to stay afloat. Chance stepped up and echoed the same fear millions of kids know too well, the fear of growing up without a father. She told the court they were just daughters who needed their dad, and that he was working on becoming a better man than he'd been before. But the moment no one forgot came when the twins brought up their youngest sister, Love, who wasn't old enough to understand what was happening. "She runs to us every night asking where Daddy is," they said. We can't watch our baby sister grow up fatherless the same way we had to. That confession silenced the room. No cameras. No noise. Just the sound of two teenagers begging the court not to let history repeat itself. And then came Justin, the one who delivered the line that echoed across every news outlet, "My dad is my superhero." To him, Diddy wasn't a headline or a defendant. He was the man who raised him, the person he still believed had so much more to give the world, and so much more to give his children. Justin didn't just ask for mercy, he asked for redemption. By the time the last child finished speaking, the room shifted. Everyone saw the situation not just as a legal case, but as a family crisis. Their speeches didn't erase the past, but they forced the world to see the emotional cost nobody talks about, the impact on the children left behind. But as powerful as their words were, the bigger story wasn't just what they said. It was why they said it, and how their emotional pleas fit into a larger narrative that goes far beyond the courtroom. And that's where things get complicated. The courtroom expected a routine sentencing. What nobody expected was the emotional shockwave that hit the public the moment Diddy's kids began speaking. Their words didn't just defend their father, they forced the world to pause and rethink the entire narrative. Because for months, headlines painted Diddy as a monster, a symbol of everything dark in the music industry. But suddenly, the people who knew him best stood in front of a judge and described a man completely different from the one millions had judged online. And that's why these speeches mattered. They weren't polished statements crafted by attorneys. They were raw, shaky, and deeply personal. Each kid shared a piece of themselves, the constant sense of loss, the confusion of growing up while their father fought public battles, the fear of watching their little sister cry for a dad who might not come home for years. Even people who had no sympathy for Diddy found themselves quieting down, realizing the case wasn't just about a celebrity, it was about a family trying to hold itself together. Online reaction was split right down the middle. Some viewers felt the kids were simply protecting a father they loved. Others argued that their statements revealed something more important, the long-term emotional collateral of a scandal this huge. Clips of their speeches instantly went viral, with millions replaying specific lines, Christian calling him a hero, Jesse acknowledging his mistakes, Quincy saying he hadn't seen this version of his father in 15 years. The internet couldn't decide if this was redemption or manipulation, but one thing was clear, everyone was talking about it. Even critics who believed the court made the right choice admitted the kids' testimonies added a layer of complexity no documentary or headline ever captured. Their words didn't erase what Diddy was accused of. They didn't soften the charges or undo the verdict. But they forced the world to confront a truth that often gets buried under scandal. Even the most controversial figures still have people who love them deeply, people who suffer quietly while the public debates their fate. And just like that, the narrative around Diddy shifted again. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to remind everyone that this story isn't just legal, or political, or cultural. It's personal. And as emotional as those speeches were, they also opened the door to a bigger question the public can't stop asking. If this is how his kids see him now, then what does that say about the man the world thought it already knew? That question sparked a new wave of discussion, and pushed the story into territory even more complicated than before. The timing of these courtroom speeches couldn't have been more explosive. Just as Diddy's children pleaded for leniency, the world was still buzzing from the release of Sean Combs' The Reckoning, the Netflix documentary that ripped open decades of hidden stories, allegations, and haunting claims from people who once lived inside his orbit. And suddenly, the public was watching two versions of Diddy play out at the same time. On one side, the documentary painted a man who built an empire through control, manipulation, and behind-the-scenes behaviors that former employees and collaborators described as disturbing. It featured interviews, previously unseen footage, and accounts that shocked even longtime fans. Conversations online turned into storms of speculation, disbelief, and anger as viewers tried to piece together what was real, what was alleged, and what had been kept quiet for years. On the other side were his children, standing in front of a judge, not as celebrities or heirs, but as a family begging the court to see the father they knew. Their stories didn't sound like the Diddy portrayed in the documentary. Instead, they spoke about a man trying to change, someone who had lost his way but was fighting to become better. To them, he wasn't the monster the internet painted. He was still dad. That contrast created a cultural split. Some people saw the kids' speeches as emotional manipulation, a last-minute attempt to soften the consequences. Others believed the children were caught in the crossfire, trying to protect the only father they've ever had while the world dissected every rumor tied to his name. It didn't help that Diddy himself had already called the documentary a hit piece, while Netflix stood firm, saying the footage was obtained legally and the stories deserved to be told. This clash between family loyalty and public accountability pushed the conversation in a new direction. Instead of focusing only on accusations, people started asking deeper questions. How much did his children know? What version of their father were they raised with? And how do you reconcile a man who inspired loyalty at home but fear in so many professional spaces? The courtroom moment became the emotional centerpiece of the entire saga, a human twist in a story dominated by scandal. Because while the documentary revealed shocking claims, his children revealed something the world wasn't expecting: vulnerability. They didn't defend his mistakes. They didn't deny his actions. They simply begged for a chance to rebuild their family, even if the world had already made up its mind. But the documentary fallout isn't going away. More interviews continue to surface, new claims keep emerging, and former insiders are speaking louder by the day. And now, every piece of that narrative is being weighed against these heartfelt courtroom speeches that added a complicated layer to an already tangled legacy. Because in the end, the documentary showed the public one version of Diddy. His children showed another. And somewhere between those two realities lies the truth, a truth the world is still fighting to understand. Long before the courtroom filled with the voices of Diddy's children, long before a Netflix documentary rewired the public conversation, there was a history quietly building beneath the surface. For years, people closest to Diddy, former employees, artists, collaborators, even acquaintances, hinted that his world wasn't as glamorous as it appeared. Some whispered stories behind closed doors. Others tried to come forward but said they faced intimidation, pressure, or fear of retaliation. And every time a rumor surfaced, it faded just as quickly, until now. The unraveling truly began when former insiders started speaking on the record, each person describing moments that painted a very different picture than the one Diddy had projected for decades. Chef Jordan was one of those early voices. She described an environment filled with volatility, control, and a level of chaos she said outsiders never understood. She hinted at receipts she didn't reveal, talked about witnessing situations involving artists and household staff, and even suggested she met with investigators who were trying to piece together the bigger picture. Her words didn't land quietly, they shook the conversation. And for many people, her statements confirmed what had only been speculation. Then came the estate drama surrounding Biggie, a battle that reopened old wounds and highlighted long-standing tensions between Diddy, Biggie's family, and the people who controlled his legacy. Reports of questionable contracts, deals allegedly signed during Voletta Wallace's final days, and figures with deep industry ties fueled the belief that this wasn't just a Diddy story, it was a story about power. About influence. About the way the industry protected certain people while others were left silent. And of course, the Netflix documentary turned everything inside out. With archived footage, interviews, and testimony from people who said they finally felt safe enough to speak, the series ignited the most explosive phase yet. It traced patterns from the early bad boy era to recent years, resurfacing claims of manipulation, misconduct, and behavior that many viewers had never imagined. Some allegations were decades old, others were shockingly recent. The documentary didn't just revisit Diddy's past, it forced people to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about it. By the time Diddy's children stood in court, the public had already spent months watching the slow-motion collapse unfold. The allegations. The denials. The billion-dollar lawsuit aimed at Netflix. Former associates stepping forward. Families disputing claims. Supporters defending him. Critics saying this reckoning was overdue. Every piece of his history had become a puzzle, and everyone was trying to figure out how it all connected. That's why their courtroom speeches hit so hard. Because behind all the noise, behind all the headlines and speculation, the past had finally caught up to the present, and the impact fell directly on the people who never asked to carry it. Diddy's children weren't just reacting to their father's sentencing. They were reacting to decades of stories, conflicts, and contradictions coming to a head in a way none of them could escape. This moment wasn't the end of the story. It was the collision point, the moment when all the old narratives, the resurfaced accusations, the unresolved questions, and the brand new evidence met under one roof. And what came next would depend on how the world interpreted everything that led here. As emotional as this moment was, anyone who's been watching Diddy's story unfold couldn't help noticing something familiar beneath the surface. Because every time a new chapter opens in this saga, a pattern seems to repeat itself, a rhythm that's followed Diddy's career for years, stretching from the bad boy era all the way into this courtroom. It always starts the same way: silence breaks. Someone steps forward with a story, a claim, or a piece of the puzzle that had never been shared publicly. Then, almost immediately, the people closest to Diddy react, some defending him, others distancing themselves, and a few insisting privately that there's much more beneath the surface. After that, the public divides. Some believe the new information instantly. Others argue the accusers are motivated by money, timing, or bitterness. And then, without fail, another revelation emerges, and the cycle begins again. This same pattern unfolded in the Netflix documentary. Former insiders spoke out. People connected to Biggie corrected or denied certain details. Independent voices backed the documentary's claims, while Diddy's team called it exaggerated or misleading. At the same time, new testimonies bubbled up, including from those who once worked inside his world and now say they'd stayed silent out of fear or loyalty. With each wave, the narrative twisted again, pulling the public deeper into a story no one could fully map. The Biggie estate controversy followed the same rhythm. A lawsuit appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Questions surfaced about old contracts, old connections, and old decisions that never made sense. Voices who had been invisible for years suddenly stepped forward. The people involved pushed back. And just when the public thought they understood what was happening, another contradiction emerged. Even this moment, Diddy's kids pleading for leniency fits into the same pattern. Their words sparked sympathy, confusion, debate, and intense emotional responses online. Some saw them as loyal children standing by the only father they've ever known. Others saw the speeches as part of a larger strategy shaped by decades of damage control tactics around Diddy's image. The truth is likely somewhere in between, and that uncertainty keeps the story alive. Because what makes Diddy's saga so intense isn't just the allegations, the lawsuits, or the headlines. It's the way every new revelation connects backward. Every new moment pulls forward something unresolved from years ago. Every voice that speaks now brings the weight of the past with it. And the more that pattern repeats, the harder it becomes for anyone to fully separate what's new from what's been lurking in the background for decades. That's why this story refuses to fade. It's not one scandal. It's not one controversy. It's an entire history resurfacing, piece by piece, at the exact moment Diddy is facing the consequences he once seemed untouchable enough to avoid. And even now, with his children asking the court for mercy, the question still hangs in the air. Was this moment the beginning of closure, or just another turn in a cycle that still isn't finished? Right now, the only thing certain is that nothing is slowing down. Diddy still faces years in prison. The documentary continues to trend and spark global controversy. Former insiders hint that more voices are preparing to come forward. Reporters are digging deeper into everything from past settlements to estate deals. And legal analysts believe more filings, civil or criminal, could appear at any time. As for the children, their emotional courtroom statements will likely follow them for years. Some people see them as brave. Others see them as conflicted. And some believe their words mark the beginning of a long healing process, one that won't be easy, no matter how much time passes. The industry is watching. The public is watching. And every new headline becomes another chapter in a saga that feels far from over. Because if the past few months have proven anything, it's this. Whenever you think the story is finally settling, something else erupts from the shadows. And the next twist might already be on its way. As the courtroom doors closed and the world replayed every moment of Diddy's sentencing, one thing became painfully clear: this story is no longer just about a music mogul facing the consequences of his past. It's about the people who grew up in his shadow, the children who loved him, defended him, and begged for a different ending. Their voices, heavy with emotion, cracked open a new layer of this unfolding saga, one that even the documentaries, lawsuits, and decades of rumors never captured. Because behind every headline about Diddy's fall, there's a family trying to survive the damage. Kids who had to reconcile the man who tucked them in at night with the accusations the world placed at his feet. Kids who stood in a courtroom and spoke with a mix of heartbreak and hope, trying to convince a judge that the father they knew wasn't the same man the public saw. Whether the world agreed or not, their words added a human weight to a story that had become pure spectacle. But their love didn't erase the past, and it didn't silence the questions. If anything, it highlighted the duality at the center of this entire saga. How can someone be a hero to their children and a villain in the eyes of so many others? How does a legacy built on success become overshadowed by accusations, legal battles, and decades of whispered stories finally being said out loud? Now, with Diddy behind bars, his empire fractured, and the Netflix documentary fueling global conversations, the future of his legacy is hanging in the balance. His kids want redemption. His critics want accountability. The industry wants distance. And the public? They're still trying to understand how one man could leave behind a trail this long, this complicated, and this painful. But one truth remains undeniable: the fallout is far from over. More voices are emerging. More details are surfacing. And the divide between who Diddy was, who he is, and who people believed him to be is only widening. In the end, the Combs family walks forward with a burden they never asked for, forced to defend, confront, and grieve a legacy that once seemed untouchable. And as the world continues watching, one question lingers in the air like a shadow that refuses to lift. When the dust finally settles, will Diddy be remembered for the music that shaped a generation? Or the consequences that reshaped his entire life?